It's the time of pumpkin spice, apple picking, and leaves changing color. This is October. And in between jack-o'-lanterns or Halloween parties, there's one constant that we all partake in: watching scary movies. We've asked our PACTV staff here to discuss horror movies that have made an impact on them. Whether it be a cursed videotape, a monster hunter, or an urban legend, our staff came up with some spooky selections that will keep you up at night. Each day for 13 days, we'll be releasing a video with our staff discussing a horror movie or two that made an impact on them. Whether it's beyond our world, whether it's things that go bump in the night, or an ancient curse, horror is the one genre that has never failed to entertain us, make us think, and best of all, scare us. Welcome to the 13 Days of Halloween. Tiff, thank you for joining us for the 13 Days of Halloween.
Thanks for having me.
So you picked two very distinct choices.
Yes.
So I have to ask you about one of them first.
Okay.
The Blair Witch Project.
Oh, the Blair Witch Project.
Which is 24 years old. Without spoiling the movie, what's the actual plot of that film?
Okay.
Briefly.
Okay, so you've got three college students that go into the woods. They're aspiring filmmakers, and they're out for the legend of Blair Witch, which is this kind of legend that took place in this town called Burkittsville in Maryland. So they're going into the woods, and everything's fine, and they're joking, and they're happy, and they're doing some crazy stuff. And then all of a sudden they start hearing things, and things start like hitting their tents, and then the whole world explodes. They get lost, they can't figure out where they are, and they're just stuck there. And it's horrifying, and it was one of the coolest things I had ever seen as a kid.
Okay, so when did you first see the Blair Witch Project?
I think I was 14 or 15. I remember being in the movie theater with my mom, and my mom was like, I can't do this much longer because it's found footage, so the camera's super shaky.
Yes.
And so she had to leave, and I remember being there by myself and being like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
And lest we forget, that was the first movie pre-YouTube, pre-social media, where the marketing was done in a manner that left the mystique. Was this real or was this not?
I think that's the mystique of it, is I loved the marketing campaign. You would go on to the website and you would click on one of the Blair Witches, and a missing poster would come up. People thought this was legit documentary in a time where found footage hadn't really existed before that, as a genre. And so people were very confused as, are these kids really missing? Are they alive? And I remember them keeping the actors kind of under the cuff so they wouldn't ruin the mystery behind the movie.
And now the movie's 24 years old. And do you see a difference between now and 1999 when you first saw it to seeing it in 2023?
Clearly the quality is not great. I mean, it's like a home movie. The found footage genre has kind of exploded. You have, what's the movie with
Paranormal Activity?
Thank you.
That's the one.
Yeah, that one, where they put cameras everywhere and there's ghosts, and it's really taken off. I mean, the Paranormal Activity franchise is huge. 7 movies, I think? Yeah, seriously.
And here's what's interesting about the Blair Witch Project is that there are all those moments that are iconic. Did you have a particular scene that you really loved or terrify you?
Well, I mean, I think the most iconic scene is the one where she's got the camera and half of her face is there, and she's like, I want to say I'm sorry to Zach's mom, and John's mom, and my mom, and she's got snot coming down her face.
Which Scary Movie lampooned rather brilliantly. Yeah. And disgustingly, of course.
As one should.
So, are there any final thoughts as far as the Blair Witch Project is concerned?
I think this made me fall. I'm a person who really loves documentaries, so I think for me this really hit as a really cool idea that it was real but not real. It broke the fourth wall. You felt like you were in the movie, maybe behind the camera. And that was a really cool place to be. It felt very interactive, and I think its legacy just lives on in that way.
It was one of the first mockumentaries to really try and shake the ground, and it did that rather brilliantly. Okay, so that brings us to another film, another very iconic film, The Shining. Not the TV version, right?
No.
Okay, can you explain a little bit about that film?
Okay, so it's about this family, and they decide that they're going to take over this hotel while it's off season. So they're going to be the caretakers of this hotel. It's a father, a mother, and this little boy. Now, this family has a bit of a rough past, and you'll see that in the beginning of the movie. And just these crazy things keep happening, and slowly by slowly, the father just descends into madness, and it's beautiful. They actually made a musical.
I believe they did. Now, the movie has withstood the test of time. 40 years plus. Do you remember when you first saw it?
Yeah, I was really young when I saw it. I think I was way too young, and I don't think my head really grasped around how serious it was. But my brother and I watched it, and I just remember thinking that the blood in the elevator was really cool.
And this is television, like before, streaming, you were able to watch The Shining on television.
Yeah, I think the first time I actually watched it in like a replaying in a movie theater.
You had a whole new appreciation, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, I was really happy that my first viewing was a movie theater, because I think you got the full feeling of it. It was very grand, because like that baritone music, that brass, it really hits you hard.
Right. Now, going into The Shining, was there a particular reason why you selected that film?
It's iconic. Like, it really is. It's part of our consciousness. I mean, the "Here's Johnny" line as he's breaking through the door. It really is. And it's also just beautifully made. It's stunning. I mean, the location itself, the hotel is a character in itself. It's beautiful. It's just cinematically just gorgeous.
And it's isolation, of course, that plays a huge theme.
Of course.
And I think that might be the only horror film that Jack Nicholson had actually participated in, maybe other than The Witches of Eastwick.
I mean, granted, he's always been a little creepy himself. Like, there's something just off-putting about Jack Nicholson, and we've all felt it. And I think this really brought out the whole-fledged creepiness of him.
And just tears into that role like there's no tomorrow. And it's Stanley Kubrick.
Oh, genius.
Which, from what I understand, The Shining, the book, is different from The Shining, the movie.
Completely different.
Is it?
It's completely different. The whole feel is different. I honestly it's very rare that I say this, but I liked the movie better than the book.
I think a lot of people did.
Yeah.
Well, I'm told that the TV version is more aligned with what the book was supposed to tell as a story versus the film.
I couldn't get over the fact that it was the guy from Wings, so that was,
and a mallet instead of an axe.
Yes, exactly. What was the point? Yeah.
Okay. Now, is there a favorite scene from that film? There's so many iconic moments, of course.
There's so many. I think the twins. The twins are in themselves pretty iconic. There's these two girls at the end of the hallway that say, "Come play with us, Danny." And the look on his face where he's just in utter shock. It was beautiful.
And here's what's interesting. He's a kid on a tricycle roaming through this vast hotel. We're meant to believe that it's going to be harmless. Him just riding through the hallways. And then, of course, he sees the twins.
Yeah.
And then the music score just hits you right away.
Yeah.
We are experiencing what Danny's experiencing.
Yeah.
All right, so any final thoughts on that film now that it's now 43 years old?
I just appreciate that it's withheld it's definitely stood to the test of time, which I really appreciate about it. That's a sign of a true iconic movie. No matter how many years, it's always going to be relevant, it always is going to be interesting, and it's always going to scare the crap out of people.
It's virtually timeless is what it is.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey Dave, what's up?
Hi, Michaela.
Okay, so what are we talking about today?
We are talking about two of my favorite horror movies. Of course, being a cinephile, there are lots of horror movies. Okay, so the first one would be Creepshow. It's a 1982 film. It was George Romero and Stephen King inspired by their love of the gruesome 1950s EC comics that would serve as the basis for Tales from the Crypt. And it's essentially 5 stories, and all of them are very gruesome, bloody, graphic stories with a moral tale when you think about it.
Yes.
One being about a patriarch who rises back from the grave to get his Father's Day cake, a spurned husband who gets revenge on his wife and her lover, a very powerful and miserly old man living in a penthouse who gets some unwanted guests, a farmer who finds a meteorite and sees it as an opportunity, and then a mysterious crate at a university that may have a very unwelcome and violent guest.
Okay. Do you have a favorite?
All of them, really. There's something about Creepshow that it's corny and it's cheesy, but it's what makes 80s horror great.
Yeah.
Because 80s horror was essentially big budget horror where horror was put on notice.
Yeah.
You had Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Evil Dead.
Yeah.
Creepshow essentially embraces the idea of an anthology story, and this is a Hollywood big budget film.
Yes.
With a pretty good cast. I mean, Leslie
Yeah.
Nielsen, E.G. Marshall.
Yeah.
I mean, there are no slouches in this cast.
No.
So every film in its own way, I took something from it that I loved, except the cockroach one. They're creeping up on you. I have a bit of a bug phobia.
Yeah, that was a tough watch for me too.
Yes, it is, especially the ending. But it also goes to say that every story has a moral at the end, and he's not the most likable character.
In terms of the other stories, did you glean an interpretation or a message from any of them?
I think the bulk of them, other than they're creeping up on your story, it's just good old-fashioned entertainment.
Yeah.
You know, the special effects, the makeup, and Well, let's face it, the film is over 40 years old. There is a certain camp factor to be appreciated from it. I mean, maybe in 1982 it hit differently versus 2023. It's hard to say as far as what I learned from it. I mean, George Romero's always been about social commentary. And as I said before, every character gets their comeuppance.
Yeah.
Leslie Nielsen's character, he's this wealthy man who owns the property. And this is the something to tide you over, where he subjects his wife and her lover to this incredibly evil and sadistic method of murdering them by trapping them in sand and then drowning them. And then, of course, as we find out later on, his plan doesn't always go through as he expects. And I think that's the biggest thing from all the stories, is that there's a moral at the end.
Yes.
These people do horrible things.
Yeah.
And it comes back to bite them on the butt. That's what I loved about Creepshow in general.
Yeah, I will say that I think the crate, the real bad guys did get away.
They did.
Because the crate, do you want to explain what the crate is about?
The crate is a story of this professor who's put upon by this loud, brash, obnoxious wife.
She's emotionally abusive.
And she's a fantastic actress.
Oh yeah, she's hilarious, but
Adrienne
I feel
Barbeau,
bad for the guy.
Scream Queen, who essentially is just this horrible woman who embarrasses her husband at every turn. And her husband, what happens is this crate has this creature inside it that has more than likely been hundreds of years old. And he sees it as this opportunity to get rid of his wife by introducing the creature to the wife. And the creature is a man-eating monster.
Yeah.
And he gets away with it. Not to give away any spoilers, but he does something incredibly horrible.
Yes.
And yet, no one is questioning him as to why he does it because of the wife's behavior.
Yeah. When did you see both films, and why did you want to talk about it?
I'm going to age myself here. I came from the VHS generation.
Yeah, I did too.
All right, so you have an appreciation when you go into a video store, you look at the artwork for hours in the aisle. Horror was a forbidden thing for me. I wasn't allowed to watch it. So of course, what happens when a kid is forbidden from doing something, they're going to want it even more. So I would scan the backs of these VHS covers for hours, just looking at the gruesome photos. And there was something perverse about it. And Creepshow always stood out to me.
Okay.
And then one day I ended up renting it on VHS and had a sleepover at my friend's house. And it's like my mind was just ripped apart. I couldn't believe what I saw.
Yeah.
It was like Twilight Zone the movie. It was this anthology story where each story is compact and succinct enough.
Yes.
That it's entertaining, doesn't slow down, and moves on to the next story.
Yes.
Plus, there's a wicked sense of imagination because
And humor.
it's and it's inspired by the DC Comics, so there are these animated panels.
Yes.
Plus, you get to see Stephen King act.
Yes.
Which
He
is
actually
rare.
did a good job.
He did.
Genuinely did a good job. And his son is the little boy in the beginning and the end.
Yep.
Yes, who's now a writer. He wrote The Black Phone with
he
Ethan
did.
Hawke. Okay, so moving on to Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Okay, so Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it's based on a novel by Jack Finney. And it was told in 1956 with Don Siegel directing. And it's a story of this small, sleepy Northern California town. Kevin McCarthy is this small-town doctor. And he gets this notice from a fellow neighbor that her uncle isn't who he says he is. He's not acting the way he is before. And at first, it's that whole thing where inverted reality, oh, it's just all in your head. Nothing's the matter. But then he starts to notice that there is a conspiracy. Friends and neighbors that you knew are no longer the people you know. And then before you know it, the whole town is overrun by pod people. They are being replaced by what are essentially organic plant aliens from outer space. The 1978 version updates that to then modern day San Francisco. And what's interesting is that while the 1956 film was sort of seen as an allegory about communism, the 1978 film kind of lampoons the idea of New Age practices in the me generation. And it transplants the story to this city health inspector, this bureaucrat played by Donald Sutherland, who along with his friends starts to see this sinister conspiracy. And what's interesting about the 78 film is that we are no longer in a small town. We are now in a major metropolitan city.
Yes.
And it's San Francisco, where anyone can blend in. So we have no idea just how deep-rooted this conspiracy runs. And then we find out.
Okay. So, when did you first see this film?
VHS as well. VHS generation. I was always drawn to the Invasion of the Body Snatcher story. I remember watching that film, and it was on VHS, and a friend of mine refused to watch it because he was traumatized. What's interesting about that film is that the 1956 film, it's made for the product of its time. The 1978 film, being a modern film, it uses this, and I'm giving away something, this ear-piercing scream. It's a great narrative device to give away someone's identity if they haven't been replaced by a pod person. And it's one of the most iconic parts of that film. And that's really one of the first times that this remake blew my mind over the 1956 version, seeing it on VHS.
Nice. Okay, so why did you want to talk about this film?
Because it's fascinating. I travel to San Francisco a great deal.
Oh,
And San Francisco is this city that is like that shining diamond on the hill. Invasion of the Body Snatchers infuses it with this sense of paranoia that San Francisco is not this inviting city. And what makes it even more special is that its director, Philip Kaufman, is a San Francisco native. And this version of San Francisco, it's depicted as this deeply paranoid, untrustworthy place. The handheld camera work really leans into that.
okay.
And there are all these little visual clues that you really start to notice. They all start to take place. There's always a dumpster nearby, throwing away some weird organic material. Of course, we find out later on what it actually is.
Favorite scene?
Favorite scene? I'm at the same dilemma you are. I can't spoil the film. But
Yes, you can.
okay. It's actually the most iconic moment of that film.
Yeah,
Yes. So our hero, I mean, let's face it, a Hollywood film, we expect the hero to survive.
yes.
The 1956 film ends on a very optimistic tone. The conspiracy's been exposed. Our hero, who we've led to believe made it, and now he's just hiding amongst all the other pod people. We learn the hard way that one of the actual survivors goes to see him, calls out his name, assuming that he's still him. And just seeing the camera slowly pan on him, just as he's got San Francisco City Hall behind him, and he does that ear-piercing scream. It's a very bleak, nihilistic ending, but kind of establishes the tone that no one is safe.
Yes.
And that is just incredibly terrifying. Like that ending, that's a good example of what happens when you wow them in the end.
Okay. Do you have any final thoughts?
I think Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Creepshow are two films that are worth watching. They're polar opposites in some respects, but there are commonalities. Creepshow is a fun anthology movie from the director of Night of the Living Dead and Stephen King. It's a fun, unapologetic cheeseburger you can just eat. There's no nutrition, but you can have fun watching it. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is just a very underrated horror film because what's interesting is that your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, you don't know who they are. Are they who you work with and love, or are they someone else that just happens to have no identity? That's why I love those films. And those are my final thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you for speaking with me, Dave.
Thank you. Okay, Dustin. Arrive hungry, leave stuffed. What is that from?
Thanksgiving.
And what is that, other than the holiday?
So that's a fake trailer that was in between two movies in a double feature called Grindhouse.
Okay. And that came out in 2007, I believe.
Yes.
And of course, Thanksgiving is going to be a movie next month. And it's a quote we always quote. Can you explain just a little bit about Grindhouse itself?
Oh,
Other than
my.
it being two movies.
Yeah, I mean, how much time do we have? Jeez. So, Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez teamed up with, I guess, a couple other directors to make these fake trailers, but they teamed up to make this one long movie that's actually a double feature. So you actually got this, the movie starts off with a fake trailer, goes into Robert Rodriguez's movie, then there's a few fake trailers, then ends with Quentin Tarantino's movie Death Proof at the end. The Planet of Terror is Robert Rodriguez's first film there that you see. And that was the idea of the movie. It was just like, let's play tribute to Grindhouse movies and just make like a couple movies that are just over the top. If you don't know what Grindhouse movies are, they're pretty much like X-rated like movies.
The exploitation drive-in movies that
Yeah.
our parents grew up watching.
Yeah.
Cheap, low-budget, schlocky, but entertaining movies that were maybe 90 minutes at most.
Yeah.
And they were
yeah.
like old two-reelers you could see in a theater in Boston in the 1970s for like a quarter.
Oh, so good.
I believe
so
that's what
good.
they were. So Planet Terror is a zombie movie.
Yeah, Planet Terror, pretty much zombie movie, over the top, and the Quentin Tarantino is a big, believer in that, and he puts that a lot in his movies a lot. That's why they're so like over the top, because of, his interpretation of pop culture and like violence in TV shows and movies, how they're just like kind of absurd
And that fast forwards us to Death Proof.
Yes.
What is the plot of that movie?
So it's pretty much this stunt man that goes around and hooks up with these girls and kills them, I guess. So the car itself is safe for him, but not for the woman in the passenger seat. So he goes, really crazy and like kills all these people. So it's more of like a thriller than I would say a horror movie. Like everything up to like Death Proof was more of like over the top horror, and then it was like more of like a thriller. Quentin Tarantino's kind of movie there. So it was kind of like, suspenseful, what's going to happen. There's, some stunt things that are going on. So it's very just like action-packed.
And it's essentially a muscle car movie, kind of a nod to Vanishing Point, films of that era.
Yes.
I mean, of course, there's a car chase.
Oh,
and of
yes.
course, there's going to be a lot of action.
Oh, yes.
So do you remember the first time? So just bear in mind, Grindhouse is a 3-hour film, 2 movies with fake trailers,
Yes.
which you'd have to have a lot of patience to see that.
Yes.
Do you remember the first time you watched that films?
Yeah, it was in the theater here in Kingston. Actually, you and I and Dan went out and saw it. The whole experience was part of what made it my favorite horror movie. On top of that, it was just jam-packed with so much, like, over-the-top horror. You could tell the people who put the time to make the movie just like loved what they did and just had so much fun with what they did,
And here we were seeing a movie that was released or as a nod to a generation before us.
Oh, yes.
We grew up in the age of the multiplex. We didn't know what that was like to go to a drive-in like that or to see a cheap movie on an afternoon for like $1.
Yeah.
And that's amazing that we were able to experience that because that's what Tarantino and Rodriguez grew up on.
Yeah.
So why did you want to talk about this particular movie? Was it just the experience or was it just the whole movie and experience?
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of both. It's the experience, that was it for me, but I would recommend it to really anyone who wants to see an over-the-top horror movie.
Okay, and that brings us to another interesting film. 2002's The Ring, which I believe is your other choice.
Yes.
What's the plot of that film exactly?
It's fairly simple. It's got this cursed VHS tape. So when you watch it, you pretty much have 7 days to live. It's suspenseful because then you see someone, watch the tape and they're gonna die in 7 days. And
it's basically a random pastiche of images that have no meaning.
Yeah.
Until we, of course, find out later on. So do you remember when you first saw that particular movie?
Yeah, I was in the local theater, Kingston. I saw it with some friends, and it was the kind of friends that got like freaked out during horror movies. It added to the whole experience of watching the horror movie because they were just like freaking out like next to me. So I was like freaking out, like, oh man, it was just, and it was also the time that it came out. I was a teenager, so it was just such a great time to see a horror movie.
And do you have a favorite scene? And I realize this is tough because spoilers.
Yeah. Favorite scene? I mean, I guess it's the VHS tape when they pop it in, they watch it. Maybe Naomi Watts like glued to the TV screen. That's probably one of my favorite scenes.
Grindhouse and The Ring are 2 films that came out at really the start of the 21st century.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a way to really set the tone for horror for the future.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dustin, for joining us today.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for coming in.
Hi, Mikhail.
Okay,
Good to
so
be here.
thank you. What movies did you pick?
Oh, so my choices for movies was In the Mouth of Madness, directed by John Carpenter, and Scanners, directed by David Cronenberg.
Nice. And can you give me a brief synopsis of Scanners?
Oh man, yes. I kind of chose some ugly movies on purpose. Scanners really kind of deals with like these type of human beings that feel like they don't have a sense of belonging in the normal world, you know what I mean? And so what essentially happens in Scanners is they're kind of given these, test subjects, I'll call them. They're given like an injection, pretty much at birth. And so it kind of gives them like a supernatural ability to scan somebody's mind or somebody in real life's mind and can actually make their brain melt, and in some cases it causes their brain to explode. So
Sweet.
it's a pretty intense movie. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so when did you first see Scanners?
Ooh, so I watched it with my dad. It was actually one of me and my dad's favorite movies from, I think I watched it about 10 years ago.
Oh, nice.
Because, yeah, it came out in 1981, so
Yeah.
it's a good movie.
Okay, solid. So why did you want to talk about Scanners?
Basically, it's a world domination movie. The evil character in this movie wants to take over, and so the good guys in a horror movie here, they want to basically stop what he's trying to do. It's kind of a bit of an ugly movie, so like you notice like the surrounding of like the walls, and it basically just takes place in like a lab and outside in like the streets, and it's really kind of like, it has a very dark aesthetic to it, and kind of like a bogus aesthetic of like the walls are all like yellow and kind of gross and brown and ugly. So that's kind of what appealed to me about this film, was just kind of its general aesthetic and its
Yes.
soundtrack.
Nice.
Right, the soundtrack was even during scenes that weren't like that intense, it always had a very eerie soundtrack. Like it never really let go of the viewer. It almost
Yeah.
made them like feel like they were kind of insane too while
Yeah.
watching the movie. You know, so I kind of like that.
Did you ever kind of pursue like an artistic project with inspired by these types of movies?
Yeah, a little bit. So I did some like film work in college and stuff like that, and I did a couple like theater plays as well, where I like really focused on like that sound design element, because
nice.
I discovered that I liked that in college. So I was like, yeah, I'll kind of mess with this a little bit and see what I can do, kind of in that same like Cronenberg style. I
Yeah.
like that.
Sweet.
So,
Nice. Okay, favorite scene?
ooh, the favorite scene from the movie has to be the ending battle, I think,
Okay.
between the brothers there. I mean,
Nice.
that's absolutely crazy. I don't want to give anything away, but let's just say the body horror that David Cronenberg can pull off is crazy.
Could you tell me a little bit about In the Mouth of Madness?
I really like what John Carpenter did here. It feels different than a lot of his films. He really went kind of above and beyond, and I felt like he really pulled a lot from like
Lovecraft, yeah.
Lovecraftian elements in this film too. I will say, I think the first half of this movie feels a little bit more like scary and rooted in reality
Yeah.
to me, and then it goes kind of like haywire in like the second
Yeah.
half of the movie. I like both halves of the movie,
Yeah.
but the first half is scarier. I'm not going to dance around that.
I
so.
will say I also thought the same thing, where I think the first half, really great pace,
Yep.
loved it. And then the second half, it was a little rushed.
Yes.
You know, I
it
think
was.
they could have explored it a little more.
At the same time, though, I think in the second half, I'm almost kind of glad they didn't delve too far into it. Like it was
Yeah.
they kind of left it subjective and up to the viewer, especially at the end there, as he was kind of
Yeah.
in the movie theater. I won't give too much away.
So when did you first see In the Mouth of Madness?
So yeah, this one was probably about 8 years ago, probably, and I think it really helped like develop kind of my love for cinema too, because there
Nice.
was so many elements going into this, and at this point in time when I watched this movie, I was like, yeah, I'm into this and this kind of movie, and
Yeah.
Exorcist style. There's some
Yes.
Exorcist scenes in there, so
Yeah.
John Carpenter really pulls everything
Oh, yeah.
for this movie. So
Totally.
yeah.
Why did you want to talk about this film?
The aesthetic of it, I don't know if you've kind of noticed, but I like insane asylums and getting
Yeah.
into that, because it's just an area where I don't really have that much knowledge in, but I think it's just interesting seeing this perspective and how it's done by these directors. And in this movie in particular, like the monsters that they pull in, and
Yeah.
they have a crazy scene with a couple dog chases, which
Oh,
I thought
yeah.
is interesting.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting to me to see like perhaps maybe what the director's fears are, right? Because I think
Yes.
what a director adds to the film, or what the writer adds to the film, is maybe their internal fears.
Yes.
So it's always interesting to me to see that, and
Yeah.
how they relate that to the world. So.
What would you guess the internal fear is?
I mean, I think there's multiple in this
Yeah.
movie. I think it's monsters. I think it's dogs, but most importantly, I think it's like self-identity. I think
Okay.
in this film, like figuring out what's real and like what's
Yeah.
not real was a huge part of this movie.
Yeah.
For Sam Neill's character. So.
Yeah, and they say this in the beginning, so I can say it, which
Yep.
is someone says something about
Oh yes.
sanity and insanity, they flip.
Yes.
They can
exactly.
flip, and then the sane becomes insane because they're in the minority.
Yep. So maybe the insane are actually the sane,
Yeah.
at least in this reality. Yes.
Fiends. Okay, so favorite scene.
My favorite scene in this one. Ooh, I like when Kane, he kind of like
Yeah.
rips off his face in the
Yeah.
middle of this. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And his face almost becomes like a book, because the main kind of premise of this movie is he's writing a book, and it's
Yeah.
sort of becoming reality for all these people in this world.
Yeah.
And so I really like that scene where he says, you have a little bit of time to get away from these monsters here, but he kind of rips open
Yeah.
the doorway to his reality,
Yeah.
and it's just a cool aesthetic in the
It
background
is.
there.
I wanted Samuel to just throw the book.
Yes.
You know?
Inside, I know.
Yeah.
I know. There's like a scene where he's like lighting it on fire, but yeah, not as good
No.
as throwing it into the void, into
That's
that
not
hole.
smart.
that
Why did
opens
you?
up, yeah.
I wouldn't even want to touch it.
I know.
You
It's
know.
making everybody go insane.
Oh yeah.
So.
Okay, so what would you say to someone who hasn't seen either film to get them to watch it?
To get them to watch it, start listening to scary soundtracks.
Nice.
Because if you don't, I think it's going to drive you up a wall a little bit, some of the soundtrack choices that these directors made. But again, I think that once you kind of get past that, I think it really adds like so much detail to the movie that it's crazy. Take away the soundtrack, it's not going to be anything. So,
Nice. Thank you for coming in, Dave.
of course.
I really
Thank you,
enjoyed this
Michaela.
talk.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michaela, for joining us for the 13 Days of Halloween.
Thank you.
So you picked some interesting choices.
Thank you.
One, of course, was a little documentary called A History of Folk Horror.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched, A History of Folk Horror is like a 3.5-hour documentary about folk horror as a subgenre, directed by Kayla Janice. And basically, it's a tour of the subgenre from its origins. It creates a thesis about what it is, how to define it, and it takes you on a tour of different parts of the world and how they differ or how similar they are and what culturally and socially they mean.
And we've all seen a fair amount of folk horror, especially in like the 60s and 70s.
Yes, and it's coming back for good reason.
Really?
Yes, so it's coming back because in terms of whenever we're not feeling good about the future, we're in turbulent times such as the 70s and the 60s,
Yeah.
we look to the past. So folk horror, I always ask, is the past actually as rosy as we think, remember it as? And the question is no.
It's been romanticized.
It's been romanticized, and folk horror is a reaction to that.
Well, The Wicker Man, they're going back to an older time,
Yes,
not really understanding that
Yeah.
this is very sinister.
yeah, pre-Christian.
Now, do you remember when you first saw this documentary?
Yes, I did. I actually was abroad. I was really missing home, and so I was scrolling through Instagram, and I saw the Brattlecast, the Brattle Theater in Boston. I'm sure you're familiar. And they did. They're familiar with the director. They have a good working relationship, and they had her on talking about this documentary, and I'm like, I have to see it. It was on Canopy for free. I used my library card, and I just watched it. And there's a section on New England, and it just made me feel good because it reminded me of home.
And of course, New England is home to quite a lot of folk horror.
Yes, yeah, it's an import from Great Britain. Yes.
Well, The Witch, I mean, that's an example, which I believe
Oh,
was local to
absolutely.
Plymouth.
So I actually went back because I had to read the script for a class in college. I went back. So it takes place in Salem, but Edgar's, and I went to Plymouth Plantation to check because a couple of years ago, I asked him about it. He actually just went to Plymouth Plantation a lot as a kid, and he went there a lot during pre-production just to get the most accurate information as possible.
Okay, so deviating off The Witch,
Yes.
what were you able to gather from this documentary particularly? Because there's so many subgenres and decades and industries involved.
Yes, so I think it's hard because it's such a long film, and
Yes, it
so
is.
yeah. So I think I'm going to go with the overarching is that, as we know, films, especially horror films, they are a product of the time and place in which they were created, not just where they were set. And so with horror especially, it's about a given society or group's fears, fantasies, and anxieties. And so with folk horror, it's about the anxiety of the past coming back. It's kind of a little bit of hauntology, like the future's not looking so good, but you don't want to go back.
Do you have a particular movie or scene that you loved from this documentary?
Well, I already mentioned the witch one.
Right.
They did have actually Robert Eggers in the documentary.
Yes, they did.
They did. Love him. Robert, I would love to be on any of your sets. If you need a coffee gopher, I will do that. I will fly to Scandinavia.
So the film itself, though, is essentially an exploration of folk horror.
Yes.
And it's interesting because of how it's interpreted, because you have England, you have America. I mean,
And different groups as well.
yeah.
Women specifically is what I am pretty drawn to, given that, my fears and anxieties are very drawn to me being a woman and being working class. And so that's why I actually picked A Company of Wolves. I felt that movie really delved into exploring the anxieties and the fears of a girl coming of age in a very fantastical way.
What is the actual plot of The Company of Wolves?
So Interestingly, so it's actually adapted from an Angela Carter, 3 different short stories from The Bloody Chamber. She actually did the screenplay as well. This film is about a girl who's actually asleep, so the entire film takes place in her own head. And so the dream is that she's in like a medieval fantastical version of England, and she's basically Red Riding Hood, but throughout the plot, people tell stories within the dream, and then those are like little vignettes. And, you know, slowly over time, she goes from, you know, the grandmother's played by Angela Lansbury, so Angela Lansbury is always saying, like, don't go off the path, like, don't trust any men, like, very much trying to make her scared. And slowly over time, the young girl starts to be the storyteller. She starts to be the one telling the stories, and she starts to actually be a very transgressive storyteller. So and Angela Carter's known for this, is that taking the old folk tales or fairy tales and actually kind of making in a different iteration in a way that subverts it and actually makes it empowering. And so by the end, everything has been flipped on its head, and she's the person in control.
So what's interesting too is that this is her in a dream state, right?
Yeah.
I find it interesting is because you look at maybe Midsommar and The Wicker Man, not the Nicolas Cage version, the original 1970s version. From a psychological point of view, it's where they're in this inverted reality where everyone around them seems to be in on a joke.
Yeah.
And they aren't. So you have to wonder what's it all going to lead to.
Yeah.
I mean, Midsummer, at one point, we're wondering what is going on here. It starts off as this joyous festival, and then there are these sinister undertones that slowly start to rise to the surface. Did you find that in a lot of horror with this documentary of a history of folk horror?
Yeah, that's one of the main themes. But also, the more you get away from sort of like the Western traditions, you start to see, you know, folk horror that comes from more oppressed groups. You see the characters actually being empowered by the folklore, by the stories and the rituals and traditions that are from their specific culture.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay, now I'm going to go back to The Company of Wolves.
Yeah.
Did you have a particular favorite scene from that film?
I did, I think, and it relates to another scene, but very briefly, is that when Rosaline is her name, she meets the huntsman in the woods, and her grandmother has already given her the cape, so we know this is Red Riding Hood, this is being retold. And so she meets this guy who very obviously is a bit flirtatious, and he's older, and he says that I'm lost from my hunting party, and he's dressed gorgeously in like this 18th century garb. And it's a contrast from one of the scenes very close beforehand where this boy who really likes her from her village, they're walking in the woods, and she actually gives him the slip and runs from him. So in that relationship, she had the power, and all of a sudden, in this relationship, because of he's older, because he's a man, and also because of class, because he's presenting himself as an upper class, you know, basically a noble, she's completely disarmed. And actually, quite literally too, because her mother had given her a knife to put in her basket, and he takes the knife from her.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and that brings us to a bigger topic. What are your final thoughts on both films? Realizing it's a documentary and a narrative film.
Oh yeah. So I think that The Company of Wolves is, if you like kind of like those lush fantasy 80s films, definitely check it out. I love Angela Carter. I was introduced to her in college reading those stories. And I also just highly recommend her work. The Bloody Chamber, The Company of Wolves is actually an adaptation of 3 of those short stories. And then with The Woodlands, I'm just blown away by how much scholarly research went into it, and how it was such a massive undertaking, and how much respect I have for the director. I know that, you know, there are also quite a lot of animators involved, and those sequences are so cool when they transition from topic. Yeah, get a library card, because both of them are on Canopy. The Plymouth Library offers that. Get them for free.
And the documentary, as you said, it's a thesis basically.
Yes.
A 3.5-hour examination of
Yeah.
folk horror throughout
Yes.
the decades.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting film.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Michaela, for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Hello.
Hey,
So Keith, what movie did you pick?
I picked The Blair Witch Project from 1999, when years actually started with a 1.
Yeah, I was born.
Ah, I had already been around for a little bit. I
Yeah.
won't get into how long.
Okay. I respect that. So without spoiling, could you please give a brief synopsis of the movie, like the plot?
The plot of it was really, it was as bare bones as it gets. I mean, kids go into a forest to do a documentary about a Blair Witch, and then it winds up stalking them. The interesting thing about it was that for about a year going into that, or leading up to it, they had done this marketing campaign that was largely online, where they set up a website that was, it was basically trying to get to the bottom of what had happened to these missing filmmakers that had gone missing out in the woods. And they did all these fake police reports, and they would release stuff like, oh, we found the guy's car in this ditch near the woods. What could be happening? So it was meta in a way that most movies at the time had not been. It was somewhat unique for the time, and having seen it in the theaters back then, people maybe, there was kind of a misconception about it that audiences at the time thought that it was real. And nobody thought that it was actually, that there was like a real Blair Witch or anything. But there was, going into it, you weren't 100% certain. Can I have some? I really want some of that.
I think that's a health code violation.
That's, you're scared of a health code violation? I mean, that's not very in the spirit of the holiday. But
I'm more of a Christmas gal. Continue. It's my business.
But
Don't worry about it.
I am very worried about it, actually. And I want my pet spider to console me now.
You have two. Keep going.
I need two. I need two comfort spiders. These are actually registered comfort spiders. I can take them into stores with me.
And planes.
But audiences at the time, nobody was going in like, oh no, was there really a Blair Witch? But you weren't 100% sure if you were going to go in and see actual found footage of kids dying in the woods just from like getting lost, not having food and that type of thing. But for the most part, I know, don't you hate it when that happens? But for the most part, it was kind of understood that, hey, it's all part of the show. It's all good times. And it certainly was. Okay. These are so velvety.
You can ask Erica where she got it. I think maybe Pepper.
I am going to ask Erica where she got these.
Okay.
These are so cute.
So, when did you see the film for the first time?
I saw it when it came out in theaters. I saw it right down at the street at the Regal Cinemas that we have down in Kingston. It was a Hoyt's back in those days. It was a Hoyt's cinema. That's the really scary thing. How long ago that was.
Why did you want to talk about this film?
Okay. Why did I want to talk about this movie? The thing is, it shouldn't have worked. Any other like typical horror movie that leaned on the found footage convention, I think it really would have fallen flat. And it's interesting. There's a scene at the start of it where they do the documentary within the thing where the girl is like looking. She's standing in front of a graveyard or something. She's looking right at the camera, and in 1940, 7 children went lost, and we don't know what happened to them. And it was totally over the top and corny, and it was sort of the filmmakers saying like, yeah, you guys probably thought that this was the kind of movie that you're walking into, but nah, it's not going to be like that. Yeah. But the way that they handled, particularly the dialogue, really worked well with that convention of the found footage and all that, because especially at that time in movies, there was sort of this arms race as far as having like the snappiest, like smartest, hippest dialogue. And in this movie, they didn't give them a script or anything. They gave them like notes and bullet points. Like this is the stuff that happens. There were some reports that they even gave them like conflicting outlines. So some of the arguments that I guess happened in it were, kind of real-ish. The dialogue in that, I mean, it didn't have like story beats. It didn't advance the story in the way that typical movie dialogue would. And had they done it like that, it would not have jibed with the whole, oh, we just found this footage aspect of it. So I thought that it really worked that way. And the other thing that I thought set it apart was that it had a way of combining sort of psychological horror and visceral in a way that nothing else really did. I mean, when you take something like a Twilight Zone episode, for example, where they get into like psychological stuff, and you know, for example, the episode where there's a nuclear scare and the neighbors are all at each other's throats about who gets in the bomb shelter and stuff, and then at the end, the real horror part is, the real scary thing is us being at each other's throats. It's scarier than a bomb, and you think about it, but it doesn't have that. It doesn't get you in that visceral way. And then when you think about like slasher movies from the 80s or the more torture-oriented offerings from the 2000s where it's,
Hostel.
Yeah, Saw, that kind of thing where it's, you look at it and oh wow, yeah, that would be a pretty bad situation, having like a head exploding device.
I wouldn't mind being in the same room with Carrie Elwes. What was Andre the Giant like?
Yeah, right? Yeah. Or being in Men in Tights, you know? Who wouldn't want to be changed to a pipe with Carrie? I totally... Who that's certainly not my idea of horror. But having like, you know, the head exploding device strapped to your head, you look at it and it's like, oh, you know, that would be a bad spot to be in for sure, but there's not much of a psychological bite to it. But with Blair Witch Project, it sort of combined those elements in a way that was relatable, where one of the more well-known scenes is, it's a really simple thing. They pass by the same log, I think, again, and it's, wait, we passed by that already. We've been walking around all day and we didn't make any progress. Like, who hasn't been in a situation like that?
So you love the groundedness, the realism, and that makes it scarier for you.
You know, it was, you could understand feeling, the way that you would feel in a situation like that. Like the part where one of the kids goes lost and he's out in the woods screaming, you know, help me, and they're okay, where are you? Help. And it just keeps going on like that. Like, you just feel like that would drive me up the wall.
Yeah, like a fire alarm.
Yeah. Like after a certain point, what would you do? Like, okay, look, we're gonna go to bed, all right? If
just pretend it's not there.
You know, I mean, figure it out.
Okay, so speaking of the log scene, do you have a particular favorite scene?
I will tell you the scariest scene in that movie. They're going through their backpack full of food, and one of the kids goes, you know, do we have any cigarettes? And whoever's digging around goes, no, we're all out. Anybody who has had a smoking habit,
yeah, the addiction,
that would, I mean, they don't play it up in the movie, but like being in a spot like that where you're even taking out the supernatural part of it, you're out there lost in the woods, you're getting low on food.
Yeah.
If you're a smoker, you would be chain gunning them in a situation like that.
Because it's like a stress reliever that actually makes you more anxious.
Yeah, even if you've quit for a while, you'd be like, no, I quit.
Your brain's hardwired.
Actually, no, give me one.
Yeah.
So like running out of butts, like
so you're saying if you want to kick the addiction, you just kind of go in the woods.
I don't know if I would recommend that as a smoking cessation solution. I think that would be the most terrible way to quit cigarettes, especially if you were
really
getting chased.
Desperate.
I think you would want the witch to kill you with that, but I would be
like... Would you like to be killed by the witch or lung cancer? I would take the witch any day, because at least people would remember me.
Maybe the witch curses you with lung cancer. Yeah.
Ooh. I don't know.
That's a
I think
scare
I'm
right
more of like a
there.
pancreatic girl.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah. Or
That's
breast
gotta
cancer
be
runs in my
that's gonna
family.
be our next special.
Pancreatic girl.
Your best, favorite cancers. Which cancer did you pick and why?
Well, October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Hey Matt, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Michaela.
Okay, cool. So, which movies did you pick?
Oh, I picked the Chainsaw movies. So I picked Texas Chainsaw from 1974 and The Evil Dead 2.
Excellent. I didn't realize there was a theme there, but it makes sense now. And I feel dumb for not noticing it. Without spoiling anything, could you give me the plot of Evil Dead 2?
Yes. So for Evil Dead 2, well, I mean, there's a lot that goes on, but essentially a rugged hero, Bruce Campbell, not really a hero, he's more of a self-interest kind of rogue. Him and his friends, and depends on what movie you're watching, but also his sibling go to this cabin in the woods, not cabin in the woods, and essentially come across an ancient evil opened up by the Necronomicon. And from there, it's just one gruesome death after the next as they all kind of get picked off slowly. Ash essentially takes the mantle and fights what is known as the Evil Dead.
Nice. When did you first see Evil Dead 2?
Actually, recently. I'm not as big of a horror person.
Get out.
Yeah. No, I'm not leaving. Not leaving this chair. It's too comfortable.
Yeah, no, you're stuck because
I've got a friend. But usually I don't watch much horror, especially like gore and stuff like that. That's just not my genre. But with Multiverse of Madness coming out and Sam Raimi being a big deal again, me and my buddies got together and we started watching some old Sam Raimi films. And that led me to watch the original short film of The Evil Dead, where his name isn't even Ash, his name is Bruce. And then Evil Dead 1, where he becomes Ash, and then Evil Dead 2, and so forth, through up to the series.
Why did you want to talk about it?
I love Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi. They are just phenomenal in what they do. One of the big things that drew me to Evil Dead 2 was the comedy elements that they kind of incorporate. The short film and the first movie don't really have that kind of comedy element, but as the series kind of progresses, they really find that niche and kind of create and define a new genre of horror.
Yeah. Am I correct in saying that Evil Dead 2 is kind of a parody of the first movie?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely picks up where the first movie left off, but it also seems like it's in a completely another universe because a lot of the characters and cast change.
Okay.
But yeah.
The names as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have a favorite scene?
Favorite scene in Evil Dead 2? Oh my gosh. There's a couple, but if I were to name one, it would definitely be the scene where he gets the chainsaw for the first time in the shed. Thank you. Gets the chainsaw for the first time.
Yeah.
He's in the shed and he's talking to the Evil Dead who has possessed his late girlfriend's head, who's in like a vice grip. And he's just like, shut up, like screaming, trying to fight the chaos that the Evil Dead just does to your mind, the insanity that it kind of pulls out. And he kind of just gives in to it all and just starts like ripping apart the head. And the scene was so brilliantly done between the lighting and the composition and everything. I think that they just really knocked it out of the park with that scene. And a lot of the time when it comes down to like gory scenes like that, I'm a big wuss. I'll cover my eyes. I won't look. Like,
I appreciate the honesty.
You know, it's too much for me sometimes, and that film knows how to kind of gross you out.
Okay, nice. You can keep him. Emotional support?
Emotional support.
Okay. So, Texas Chainsaw. Can you give us a brief synopsis?
Yes. Yeah.
You're using it like a worry stone.
So Texas Chainsaw, that is a film essentially where, and it sets itself in a very realistic kind of sense where this could happen to you. You could be on a vacation or on a trip to go somewhere and you could just get completely abducted by somebody.
Yes.
And that situation in its sense is very scary to me.
Yes.
Honestly, I deadbolt my doors at night now. I mean, not that I didn't before, but now I really make sure they're deadbolted just because that kind of horror really does exist in our world.
It does. Yeah, even the way that the film is shot and the way that it looks, it's very, very grimy. Almost, it looks like a documentary, like from the 70s.
And the interesting thing is too, is the way that Tobe Hooper kind of went about it too. He said that it was a true story. In the very beginning of the film, they claim it to be a true story. It's not. It's inspired by some true stuff, but it's not. Nothing in the film itself is actually true. But they put that forward because, from what I understand, Toby was trying to make a statement about how much, you believe whatever you're kind of put forth. And a lot of that came from government stuff during the time that it came out.
Yeah.
And the state of the country at that point.
Yeah, the 70s was a wild time. Stagflation?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
And from there though, that movie does a lot of things that become staples in the 80s horror boom that happens in the late 80s or mid 80s.
Memory serves correct. Around that time, kind of Hammer horror, like the gothic, lush period pieces were kind of going out, and films like Texas Chainsaw or even Maniac kind of brought in that new kind of realistic, gory, dirty kind of horror.
Yeah. And it has a lot of, like I said, a lot of staples from movies that will come out later. Like, it's very old school horror style, where you'll see, like, usually typically a woman will be the last remaining survivor.
Yeah, final girl.
Yep, the final girl, exactly. And and she'll she'll survive not because of skill, but because of sheer luck. That changes per movie, but in this movie, in Texas Chainsaw, literally the only reason she survives is because 2 random people in trucks come through and save the day.
Yes.
Not explaining how, but like their involvement was just sheer luck for this character. So yeah, I mean, for that time period and what Tobe Hooper kind of did with the budget of that film was so low, they had to make a lot of low budget decisions, and one of the things that ended up happening was that they had this knife that was supposed to like draw blood and like push blood out of the tip, but it wasn't working, probably because of the insane conditions that they were working in, the heat of Texas. And they essentially tried cutting the finger and it wouldn't push out the blood, so what they ended up doing is they got a real knife and they actually cut their finger on screen. Real blood, real finger cut. And for me, that's a little too extreme, that's a little too intense. I probably wouldn't be able to do that if I ever tried making a film like that, but like, that's some serious dedication to the craft for real. Like.
Yeah. I hope they had a first aid box.
I hope so too. I hope so too. And there's a lot of those situations that kind of happen on screen, like, without saying who, there's a character that ends up having their face on the pavement.
Nice.
And it's in Texas, so the pavement is
Hot.
insanely hot, like their skin almost melting off.
Okay.
So it's just a lot of low budget, like crazy, neat tricks that they kind of had to, or things that they had to go through to kind of get the film off the ground in the first place.
Excellent. So thank you for coming in today. I really appreciate it. Had a great time talking to you.
Thanks, Michaela.
You may leave.
I will. Before I go though, make sure you lock your doors at night.
Okay,
Don't talk to random strangers. And if you see an evil book, don't read it. That is all.
Thank you, Michaela, for joining us for this 13 Days of Horror segment.
Thank you.
So you've picked some very interesting choices for this one. They're primarily about class. However, they're both from 1960s Japan.
Yes.
The first film, if I'm pronouncing this right, I hope I am, was Kuroneko.
Yes.
Okay, I did get that correct.
Nice.
What is that about?
So the plot of Kuroneko is actually, so it's, again, kind of a folk tale, and it's about these 2 women, a wife and a mother-in-law, who, and the son/husband has gone off to war because it's feudal Japan and they're peasants and he's, required to be a soldier. And while they're away, a group of samurai actually come and assault them and they get killed. And so what happens is after, it's very similar to Batman Returns where like a cat like licks at their, licks them and they're dead. They actually come back and they look like they've risen in class, and you're thinking, what's going on? Like, this is so strange. Like, I thought they were dead and I thought they were peasants, and they had come back as ghosts because they have a mission to kill every samurai. Meanwhile, the husband/son actually got promoted to be a samurai, from his valiance. And so the son is actually tasked with finding, who's killing all these samurai. Meanwhile, his wife and his mother either go to hell or they kill him.
And I'm assuming that this kind of broadened your knowledge of Japanese cinema.
Yeah, totally. I definitely need to explore more of that.
Okay, now why did you want to talk about this particular film?
Well, I wanted to do a foreign film because I love subtitles. I liked this film because I wanted something that was different from my other picks, that complemented the other thing we're talking about, the other film. And it does horror in an interesting way because on paper it's a horror story, but the way it's executed is very elegant and it's almost like a historical drama. It's like a tragedy.
With horror overtones?
Yeah, with like, it's shot like a horror film, but it's slow and deliberate and very sympathetic to the family.
Every horror film has that one moment, that one iconic moment, that you will always love, your favorite scene. Do you remember that for this film?
Yeah. So the son is fighting his mother, and he cuts off her arm, and it turns into a cat's paw because they're cat women. Kirineko actually, I think the title in English, the literal title is the black cat in the bamboo tree or bamboo forest, because there's that large forest that they're hiding in. And the mom puts it in her mouth, and she's definitely on wires, because then she just backflips out the window.
Right. If I were a newbie and I wanted to see this film for the first time, why would you recommend it?
If you want to see something that is so just good black and white, beautiful to look at, something kind of slow and methodical, and if you want to broaden your sort of like your palette or your, just add to your letterbox list, there's no reason why not to. It's in the Criterion Collection.
Which brings us to the next Criterion Collection section, and I believe it's the same director?
Yes.
Onibaba.
Yes, so Onibaba was Kirineko was 68, Onibaba is 64, and they're very similar on the surface. So they're both actually about a daughter-in-law and a mother, and the son/husband is off to war. But instead, this time, there's no supernatural elements, arguably until the very end. It feels like a horror film, but again, there's that element of drama. So what happens is they're dirt poor. It's the same, it's feudal Japan, it's the same setting, and they live in like these grass fields, and so it's like this claustrophobic environment, and so kind of like things have gone topsy-turvy, and like there's hail in summer, and so the crops have all failed. So as a result, they have resorted to killing samurai, and then stealing their armor, and then selling the armor, and dumping the bodies in a hole in the middle of the field. And as a result, it's so brutal, and what happens is a man comes back from their village, and he says, your son/husband has died, and that kind of completely throws the relationship between the younger woman and the older woman off kilter. And so the older woman plots to try to bring that relationship back to a way that benefits her, and it bites her in the butt.
It's interesting too, because it seems like desperation puts people in the mode of survival to the point where they don't care. Morals are out the window.
No, they kind of imply that like everyone's doing stuff like this in this time period, in this area. And that's why I think the film does have a lot of empathy towards these characters. And everything is just shot so brutally, and there's like these pounding drums.
Now, the sense I'm getting from both films is they are about class.
Yes.
Am I correct in that assessment?
Yeah, I would definitely say so, that it's definitely the director critiquing probably what he saw in his everyday life. And so in one film you have, basically the samurai at the time were, upper class, nobility. And so in both films they're portrayed like as horrible people that are causing these wars, making people go off and fight the wars for them, and also just treating people horribly. So then you have the protagonists, which are these very morally gray women who, out of desperation, working class women, out of desperation, kind of rise up against their oppressors, I guess. But it's the main theme, I think the main message that the director is trying to convey is these inequalities have created so much suffering for people who have nothing to do with it.
And it almost seems like societal injustices are being flipped.
Yes.
Causing these people to have some form of power, ghoulish power, over the others.
Yeah.
So there must be a favorite scene from both films.
Oh, so I told you about Kirineko, and I think Onibaba, I really, kind of two scenes. One of them I laughed, and one of them I was like, that's so cool. Anything with the samurai with the mask when he shows up, that's immensely creepy. Onibaba means demon hag, and so he's wearing an Onibaba no mask, and he's ordering the older woman to, help me through this grassland, and she actually tricks him into falling into the hole. She takes his mask, and then she uses the mask to try to trick the wife into submission again. She pretends to be a demon.
So here's what's interesting too, is that, as you said, it widens your palette for cinema and subtitles.
Yes.
For people who are fans of horror but haven't really broadened their palette, would you recommend these films to them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they're not, if you don't like gore, they're not particularly bloody. There's only kind of like one scene at the very end and very, very end in Onibaba that has, it's a little bit gory, not much. Both of them are just emotionally brutal. They're harsh realities that the characters are living with. If you can't stomach that, then this isn't for you. If you like things that are more fantastical, that's not really what the films are about. But if you like things that are starkly realistic, especially if you like The Witch is incredibly realistic. I feel like you'd like this.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michaela, for joining us today. Erica, thank you for joining us for the 13 Days of Halloween.
Of course, I'm happy to be here.
Now, off camera, we've talked enough about movies.
Yes.
So you picked some good ones.
Yes.
Coraline. What is the plot of that film?
So Coraline is about this little girl who moves into a new house. It's called the Pink Palace, and her parents are writers, and they're very self-absorbed, borderline neglectful, and she starts roaming around this house and finds this door, opens it up, brick, nothing going on. But then at nighttime, it opens up this portal into this other dimension, which is basically the flip of what she's living in, and she meets her other mother and her other father. After a while, she starts to realize something is not right here. Very uneasy about being in this place. It seems very perfect, but something's not right. So it's this play on, this young girl being neglected and then all of a sudden being showered with love and affection, but it just doesn't sit right with her. And I don't want to explain too much without giving away spoilers, because there's a lot of spoilers that I could definitely lay into.
Seems like it flips the script and the whole idea of the grass is always greener, but not necessarily.
Exactly. It is one of those things where you have to be grateful for what you have, and it's okay to want something more, but also understanding that with other things come consequences, and you never know what those consequences are going to be. And especially as a young girl, looking at something that is so grand and spectacular that you can't help but want to go to something that looks a little bit nicer.
Now, for fans of The Nightmare Before Christmas, I believe it's the same team. Henry Selick
Yes.
is the director behind this.
Yes.
Oh, so do you remember when you first saw Coraline?
I do. I was actually probably in my early 20s, and it was a very creepy movie.
This is a family film.
It's classified as a children's movie. So when you're watching, you're like, I don't know what child is watching this and feeling okay about this. So it is definitely very thought-provoking. It's very disturbing because there's a common theme of buttons in the other world where they don't have eyes, they have buttons for eyes. And it's the other mother's way of seeing what's going on in the real world, because she has these dolls that go out and see what's happening. So the dolls have buttons eyes as well, and they're connected to the other mother. So it's this very weird kind of eyes are the window to the soul. What do you really see? So there's a lot of folklore related to this movie as well. It's very, very creepy.
It seems like every tale, fairy tale, which this sounds like it may be, has a very sinister undertone.
Yes.
When you think of all the fairy tales we've heard over the years, and there's always something sinister about it.
Yeah, and with the other mother, she is very sinister, and you don't realize it towards the end of the movie, but there's a common theme too where she's always giving food. It distracts you. We don't know if the food is drugged, but it has this undertone of anytime there's a magical being giving you food, don't eat it. And you can see in the scenes that the other mother never actually partakes in eating the food that she's given. The father has this massive plate of food. The young girl is eating it normally and she's super distracted, but it plays into Hansel and Gretel of going to the house, eating all of the food and candy and fattening them up, and the witch captures them, and we don't know if she's going to be eaten. What is actually going to happen here?
Now, you must have had a favorite scene from this film.
Yes, I did have a favorite scene from this film, and it is probably the most impactful for me as far as remembering it. Anytime she goes through the door, it's this tunnel, And the tunnel changes every single time she does it. You know, the first time it's this beautiful glowing, like you are very drawn to it, you have to go through it. The next time she goes in, she sees like old abandoned toys. Another time she goes through, she sees it desolate and dark, and it starts leading you up to this final scene at the end of the movie where you learn that, yeah, the other mother has captured other children before her, and, you know, they didn't make it.
So, for the uninitiated, people who aren't really familiar with animation being more than what they grew up watching, would you recommend this to people?
I would. Just don't do it if you have issues with your mother.
Okay, I will
If you
remember
have
that.
a good relationship with your mom, then by all means go for it. But if you've got some family issues, might not be the best movie to watch.
I'll remember that. All right, so shifting over to live action now.
Yes.
You picked a film that I would never expect. Props, by the way.
Thank you.
2004's Van Helsing.
I love Van Helsing.
What is the plot?
Okay, so the plot is he has to help this family, the Valerians, get back into the great beyond. And one of the things that they can't do is pass on without killing Dracula. And if they don't kill him, then they'll forever be in purgatory. So Van Helsing has to help this family kill Dracula. And it's this big play on, you know, good versus evil, because there's a certain point in the movie where he's trying to help Frankenstein's monster survive and live. And he sees that he's not an evil person. He's not bad. And that is one of the biggest lines that he says of, I have to make sure that, you know, who I'm killing are actually evil. And he's not evil.
He's just a misunderstood lost
He's
soul.
misunderstood. And, you know, Van Helsing is misunderstood too, because, you know, he was somebody that, quote unquote, murders people. Because to the eyes of the public, monsters don't exist. They only see what their true form was after they've died. So they always just assume Van Helsing's a murderer. He's not saving them, he's just killing people. So it's this big back and forth of, you know, what is good and what is bad.
Interesting. Now, do you remember when you first saw this film?
Yes. So I first saw this film when I was like 16, and, you know, as a young girl watching this movie, I love Hugh Jackman. He's, oh my goodness, I can't help it. But, you know, I was also a child that loved to play, loved to pretend, and seeing the vampires and the werewolves, it allowed me to kind of immerse myself into this other world that brings so much nostalgia to me. Like, I had a lot of movies that I wanted to pick that really brought me back to my childhood, but this is something that brought me back to, you know, where I was in middle school and high school, just being kind of an odd person to begin with. So being able to resonate with Van Helsing of, he's just misunderstood, he just wants to be a good person. I'm like, oh my God, like, it just makes so much sense to me.
Okay, so do you have a favorite scene from that movie?
Ooh, favorite
And I want to bear in
scene.
mind, Van Helsing itself, despite the character being a horror character, it's more of an action horror movie,
Yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah. So there's not a lot of blood and gore. There's not a lot of like scary things that come up. But, you know, again, when it came out, there were a lot of scenes that were pretty scary. Like, vampires are inherently scary. Werewolves are inherently scary. My favorite scene, I think, is probably when, you know, Anna and Van Helsing fall through this well and they find Frankenstein's monster, and he starts professing, he's like, I just want to live, I just want to live. He never asked to come into this world, but now that he's here and so many people are hunting him and trying to use him for evil, he wants a second chance. He just wants to be able to live his life the way that he wants to. So I think seeing the humanity in a monster was probably one of my favorite scenes.
And that's the thing about Frankenstein. People seem to misunderstand that.
Yes.
He's just looking for his own humanity.
Yeah.
Okay, so any final thoughts on either Van Helsing or Coraline?
Final thoughts. You know, after watching Coraline again, I did a little bit of additional research on it, and there's a lot of folklore related to it. And towards the end of the movie, it's revealed that the other mother is called the Beldam, and it's actually based off of a French story of a beautiful woman tricking these children into coming into her home. Again, kind of the same thing of Hansel and Gretel. And basically living off of their lives to stay young and beautiful. And there's so many other like folklore stories that come into play here that built this character. So it's really interesting how the writer and the director had taken so many bits and pieces of different stories to create this one person. And then for Van Helsing, again, it's just, who doesn't like vampires and werewolves? Like, come on, like, this is fucking great. Oh shoot, I shouldn't say
It's all
that.
right. We can retake that. This is great. Okay. Well, thank you, Erica, for participating in the 13 Days of Halloween.
You're very welcome. I'm
Good
glad
luck
to be
editing.
here.
Hey Dave, welcome back.
Thank you.
It was
good to
like
be
you
back.
never left. Okay, so what movies are we talking about today? Underrated, correct?
Underrated, yes. 2016's Under the Shadow, and of course, 1990's Jacob's Ladder.
Okay.
Not the remake, the original film.
There's a remake?
Yeah, we won't talk about
Okay,
that.
thank you. Okay, so could you give me the brief synopsis of Under the Shadow?
Under the Shadow it's interesting because it's what I love about horror. Social commentary. This film is set in the early 80s in Iran, and it's set during a time of great political upheaval and violence. This woman, she is trying to get back into med school, and she's been rejected because of her youthful activities as an anti-war protester. And
So she was too cool.
apparently, yes, she was too cool.
Okay.
Her husband is a doctor, and he's enlisted, so he has to go and serve on the front lines. And what happens is their city and their neighborhood are being rocked by violence and war. She's had to look after her daughter, and meanwhile, all the residents that she's established a very warm relationship with are starting to leave because things are getting bad. And what's interesting about this film is that it's a great haunted house film. This apartment building that this mother and daughter are in, things start off rather sinisterly, and then it expands onto far more heavy political overtones. There's a moment where this missile ends up at the top of the roof. And I mean, that's horrifying enough,
Yeah.
but that's just an omen of what's to come.
Ooh.
That's what I loved about Under the Shadow.
Okay.
And plus, it's a very good ghost story.
Oh yeah. Okay, so when did you first see it?
I saw it, I was on a date, 2016, at the Brattle as part of a film festival.
Oh, nice.
I knew nothing about it, but I was interested. So I remember seeing it, and it's actually terrifying. The editing itself is very terrifying. I remember my date was scared at some pretty crucial moments. But it was a packed house, and I'm like, this is a very original and inventive film. And it's also, it goes to show you how horror is so broad.
It is.
It's not just limited to a westernized audience. There's a whole world out there of horror in
Yes.
every country. There's just so much good stuff out there.
Yeah.
Under the Shadow is just one of those things.
Okay.
Yes, it's
You
not
said
either.
something about the editing being particularly terrifying. Could you elaborate on that?
Toast. It's simple. There's a moment of great tension, and then it cuts to toast being popped up from the toaster. I know that seems silly, but if you watch the film in that context, oh my God.
Oh God.
Because the film is slowly building and ratcheting up the tension within you as the viewer. And what's great about this film is that they are starting to show you something really bad is going to happen here. And it's amazing how just a simple kitchen task is a precursor of things to come.
Oh my gosh.
And my date screamed when she saw that moment. I shook. I was surprised too.
Okay.
It's toast.
It's funny that you got scared from toast.
If you see the film, you'll understand what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Bet.
All right.
Okay, so why did you want to talk about it?
I feel like horror movies, you know, we all know the iconic horror films, but Under the Shadow is one of those films that is on Netflix, and everyone has Netflix.
Yeah.
They should see it. It's a couple hours of your life to see a really good ghost story. And what I loved about it was that, you know, in my limited worldview, it essentially took what is called the Djinn character, and I'm sorry if I'm getting this incorrect, a genie in mythology. But the Djinn in this film, giving it away, is a very sinister character. And that leads me to my favorite scene in the whole movie.
Okay.
The big plot twist, or the big reveal. Our character gets a knock at the door, goes to answer it, goes outside, hears nothing, but she knows something bad has happened. There are these clues. And then she turns around, and there's the Djinn. And it doesn't look like a monster, it doesn't look like a creature, it's a bedsheet. That's all it is. It's a bedsheet covering an invisible being.
Oh, so a bit like Conjuring.
Exactly like The Conjuring.
Ooh.
And this being evaporates right into the apartment and slams the door. And that's pretty much when the script is flipped. That's when we know, okay, now we are vindicated. We know something really bad is happening here. It's not just our character imagining all these things. It's not her losing her sanity or the relationship between her daughter. And one of the things I loved about that film is that the political and social tensions are in the background. But what this film really is that this is a mother-daughter story and how their relationship it's brittle.
Yeah.
It's starting to fall apart. Only made worse by the appearance of this Djinn.
Yeah.
That's what I loved about that film in particular.
Yeah, I love any sort of story that centers around a very close, familiar relationship. Brother and sister, sister, brother, parent and child. There's something that everyone can relate to, and so everyone's immediately invested.
And the elder protects the younger.
Yeah.
And we see this mother struggling. And of course, then you have all these social tensions where she is forced to act under that duress.
Yeah.
It's only made worse.
Final thoughts.
I think Under the Shadow is one of those films you should see if you love a good ghost story. The social commentary is there, but in my opinion, Under the Shadow is just a really good ghost story that's worth watching. And it's a simple story.
Yeah, you convinced me to go home and watch it.
You'll like it.
Maybe not tonight because I'm busy, but.
Watch it with the lights off.
Oh yeah, sure.
I made that mistake, but it does work in the movie.
Oh yeah, no, totally. I'll let you know if I jump at the toast.
Right.
Jacob's Ladder.
It's a film about this postal worker played by Tim Robbins. He's a New York postal worker, he's a bachelor, and he starts seeing these haunting spectral visions. And we don't quite know if he's imagining it or if this is really happening. The backstory is that he was a soldier during the Vietnam War, and he participated in this drug experiment for the U.S. Army. And it seems like it's coming back to haunt him. But the thing is it really him experiencing hallucinations or something really out there that's screwing with his psyche? And the film pulls the rug out from underneath you because you have no idea what's happening.
Yeah.
You're led to believe it's a psychological horror movie, and then it does a 180 halfway through the story. I don't want to reveal what happens, but it makes you wonder. And it's also from the director of Fatal Attraction, another psychological horror film.
Another one. Yes.
It messes with your head.
So, when did you first see Jacob's Ladder?
I saw it years ago. A coworker recommended it to me. I saw it on VHS. I was terrified. This goes back to the era of when I didn't want to watch horror movies, but I was sort of drawn to it. He said, you really need to see Jacob's Ladder if you like a good horror film. And I loved it. The fact that the film was just a simple story and it's set in an urban setting. And there are moments that really, they don't really get anywhere, but they do. And it's a marvel of acting because of Tim Robbins and what he has to do. There's a moment in the film, and it's probably the best scene in the film, and I'm going to the favorite film scene, where his character starts to have a breakdown, and he's stripped by his girlfriend and his neighbors, and they throw him in a bathtub, and they put ice in there. But it's almost like he's gone. He's seeing something they are not, and the imagery is just unbelievably creepy. But also, another favorite scene, it's a more iconic moment, is a nightclub. I don't like nightclubs. If you think about this...
Ditto, but I've never been to one.
Good.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
lucky.
Expensive.
Yes,
gross.
and watered down drinks.
No.
But with Jacob's Ladder, they go into a nightclub.
That's
and
the worst part.
they're a meat market. There's sardines. You're packed in there like there's not a tomorrow. Our character sees his girlfriend. She's having a good time. And then he hears this flutter sound, like giant wings. He looks around, and it looks like there's this giant, human-sized, bird-like figure. And that's not the worst thing. He sees this creature grinding with his girlfriend. And it gets worse because you have no idea what's going on. That's arguably one of the most iconic moments of the whole film.
Oh my God.
Yeah, there's a lot happening in that film.
Okay, I also want to see this film now.
Yes.
Okay,
You
so.
may have nightmares.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to hold you that. All right, pinky swear.
I just looked like I flipped you off.
I know.
Okay. Why did you want to talk about this film?
Because it goes in the underrated aspect. It's an underrated horror film. Like I said, we all know about Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween. But psychological horror, I don't think gets enough due. And I feel that Jacob's Ladder is one of the best representations of psychological horror. And also, it's, at least from what I have gleaned, is one of the first horror films that address the after effects of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
This veteran is experiencing these hallucinations that may or may not be part of reality.
Yeah.
And the movie, to use the language foully, is that it's basically a bunch of WTF moments. What is going on here? And you are just as perplexed as Jacob. Well, you're just as perplexed as the main character.
Yes.
I don't know if the main character's name was Jacob. So I'm going to redo that.
Yeah, go for it.
Basically, as if you are as equally perplexed as Tim Robbins' character. What is going on here? And it keeps throwing you off. There's a lot of open-ended questions that the film messes with you. And I think it's the job of a horror film, when needed, to make you think.
Okay.
And Jacob's Ladder definitely does that.
Hey Max, thank you for coming over from down the hallway.
Well, of course, yeah, it was a long walk.
Yeah, thank
Long
you.
walk.
So, what movies did you pick for today?
I picked Nightmare on Elm Street and The Strangers.
Excellent. Okay, so without spoiling, could you give like a synopsis of each?
The Strangers is basically this couple. It didn't quite work out. This character James had proposed to his girlfriend Kristen, and wanted to get married, of course. And for some reason, he did this at a wedding reception, which is very strange, So yeah, so first mistake right there.
Yeah.
So they end up going back to this house that's in the middle of nowhere, and they're trying to make up and get through it, and this is just summing it all up. And then they receive a strange knock on the door, and the character's face is like in the shadows and everything. You don't recognize who this is. She comes in asking if this is so-and-so's house. And basically there's these 3 strangers that come in, and they basically torture them throughout the whole night. And it's just really spooky because you're at your house and everything, and like they're
the
just
place you think is the most safe.
It's just home invasion and everything.
It is, and home invasions are actually a possibility. This film is grounded in realism. This could happen hypothetically. Probably has.
I don't doubt it. Yeah, I think every time I watch that film, I have to
lock
look
your
over my
doors.
shoulder for the rest of the night. Yeah.
I have like a hammer in my nightstand.
Yeah.
Yeah, several actually planted around the house.
Gotta be prepared.
Anyways, could you give us a rundown of Nightmare on Elm Street? I think everyone kind of knows the gist of it, but just for the sake of the format.
It's basically a boogeyman that comes through and haunts people in their dreams. And there's like essentially no way of escaping.
Yes.
And yeah, it's just a very general.
Yeah, the boogeyman kind of looks like he's like made of pizza.
Yeah.
And he's got the claws.
Yeah.
He's got the hat, and it's Robert Englund. He's iconic.
Yeah. Yep.
Truly. Okay, so when did you first see both films?
I'm not so sure when I first saw Nightmare on Elm Street. I think it was just kind of blended together. I think when I watch movies, it tends to be like I see parts of a movie and everything, and then I want to go back and watch it, because I think I actually saw Freddy vs. Jason, like their fight scene, and then I'm like, oh, okay, I want to know more about like who Freddy Krueger is, and then that led to that.
Yeah.
The Strangers, I saw that at a friend's house back when, I don't know if it was college or high school, but I saw it at a friend's house, and I remember after that ending, like, it was just like a few days where I was like, very alarmed.
So you watched Freddy vs. Jason and were like, I want to figure out who's this Freddy guy.
Yeah.
What drew you to Freddy rather than Jason?
I don't know. I think I like the colors, the red and green sweatshirt, the hat. And the
I was
claws.
into Jason because I played hockey.
Yeah.
And I could relate to the mask.
Yeah. Yeah, the mask too. And then I think Freddy, he talks a lot more. He has a lot of like,
He's more personality.
lines. Yeah.
Yeah, he's less of a cipher.
Yeah, because I think in a lot of those movies, like, like Mike Myers and Halloween, like they're all like, or Jason, they're all like really like quiet killers,
Yeah, they're quiet. They're kind of, they're there to do what the script wants them to do. And they're iconic because of everything else in the film and the imagery and the iconography, but not necessarily for their personalities, and Freddy is an exception.
Yeah.
So why did you want to talk about these films?
There's like the first 2 that really come to mind. I'm thinking of like Halloween, like horror movies. I think I watched Nightmare on Elm Street like every Halloween, and then Strangers it was just a movie that like it made enough of an impact on me to like actually like mentally really freak me out. So I felt like that was worth bringing.
Don't you love that?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have a favorite scene in either? I haven't seen The Strangers, but automatically it's when Glenn Howerton gets shot.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Glenn Howerton. Can I talk about the scene without giving it away? All
Well, Erica spoiled both of her movies, Coraline and Van Helsing. So I think you're able to do whatever you want.
Okay, free rage. Glenn Howerton pulls up, and this was all set up earlier in the film where our main character, James, had called his best friend to come pick him up in the morning because, the engagement didn't work out so well.
Yeah.
And
I wonder why.
he shows up early because he's a good friend. He wants to check on his friend and see what's happening. And he goes in and he's ready to help. And like I feel like in that situation, I would have like probably called the police before going in.
Yeah, no, not smart.
Yeah, so it's got those classic like horror movie like why are you doing that? But the killer is right behind him, and he has a potato sack on his head is what I call it.
Oh, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has the potato sack on his head.
Yeah.
So all 3 killers are masked. 2 of them have kind of like doll faces, and one of them, the guy,
Yeah.
sack on his head.
A sack on his head. I think they call it like a ski mask in the movie, but it looks more like a potato sack.
I don't think I've ever skied in a potato sack, on my head, on my feet, anywhere on my body, really.
Yeah.
Maybe I should try.
It doesn't seem like it'd work out too well,
No.
but you know. So we'll go for a potato sack. And then his footsteps are masked by this old record player and everything, so you can't hear him and everything.
Yeah.
And so he's walking, and the killer's just right behind him and just watching it. And then, so meanwhile, James and Kristen had bunkered down in a bedroom with a shotgun, and he ends up shooting his best friend and not the potato sack guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really poor aim.
Yeah. Well, just like, I mean, you think it's him, and then it's just.
Yeah. Never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot. That is one of the 4 rules of the range.
You didn't have a lot of experience. I think you watched his dad hunt or something like that,
Yeah,
but
no,
not so much for him.
You
no.
need to be a responsible gun owner.
Yeah.
Yes. What's your favorite scene in Nightmare?
I guess that's kind of the ending, to be honest with you. Nancy comes out to the car, and the car is like, a red car, thinks that she's defeated Freddy Krueger. She opens it, gets in with all her friends and everything, and then the soft top comes up, and it's like the same colors of the sweater and everything, and it just fits. I think it ties in so well. I thought that was a great way to end the movie, because it's like you can't escape the dream and you can't escape the reality, and then I think there's like an element of just kind of like a psychological element to it that I like, where it's like just battling that mental, like you can't really escape it, but then there's like you want to see a way of getting out of it, and that's kind of what I like about both those films.
Yeah. Did you ever see? There's a whole YouTube channel about like ways to outsmart horror films, like other ways of doing it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I think you'd like it. I'll let you know.
That'd be sweet.
Yeah. Okay, so that about wraps it up. Max, thank you for coming in from down the hallway once again.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, if you want me to call you a cab,
okay.
I can do
that'd
that.
be perfect. An Uber or something. Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed watching these videos as we had just as much fun making them. With Halloween right around the corner, there's plenty to watch out for. So next time, keep your porch lights on, your doors locked, and your television sets preferably off when you're asleep. Just not near any plants. Happy Halloween.